Let's go.
You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
Hey folks, welcome back to Making Data Simple. We're going to talk about IBM today, which is exciting for me. I have Rob Thomas, who's the Senior Vice President of Software, and he's the Chief Commercial Officer at IBM. That means he runs development, he runs our sales motion. He's a University of Florida grad. He's a Vanderbilt alum. I think everybody must know you, Rob, by now. I mean, like I think you've been on the podcast like 3 times, something like that.
Great to be with you again, Al, and impressed with what you're doing. I do follow everything that you're doing. Incredible followership to the podcast that you've built. So congratulations on everything you've done.
I think we got lucky. It's hard work, each opportunity, right? But we started at the right time. And yeah, we've got a few listeners now. So I'll go around the world and then I'll find somebody. I think, hey, maybe I need to take a break. And then I'm in like Spain and somebody says, hey, I listened to that podcast. And I'm like, oh, I can't take a break. I'll keep it going. And then I get to talk to people like you. It gives me an excuse, right? So it works out great. So anyway, with Rob here, we were going to start it out at the beginning of the year, just so he can set our sights on 2024. But then we thought, hey, we've got IBM Think, which is IBM's flagship conference. That's between May 20 and 23rd in Boston. That's where IBM hosts senior business and technology leaders from across the industries. We also have Tech Exchange, by the way. That's for technologists, practitioners, and developers. But next month, we're going to talk to these technology leaders, and we thought this would be a great time in preference to that conference to really get Rob's view on IBM leadership, technology, whatever comes up. So we got 30 minutes. I want to hit it hard, so I'm going to jump in if you're ready. You ready?
Absolutely. Always
First
ready.
off, you still healthy? You still working out every day?
I do most days. It's a good way to kind of, I'd say, keep a routine going. But the problem with getting older is that it's way easier to get hurt. So I have found that mixing up, doing different things, a little bike, a little running, a little walking, a little weights, makes a difference. Because if you do one thing over and over again, you start to get hurt, is what I've noticed.
I think you're probably right. And it gets boring. So you do that in the morning before you start your day?
Typical, yeah. Default would be morning. Get up around 5 or so and do that right away. Then normally do a bunch of email and reading right after that. That would be the normal. But when you're on the road, sometimes it ends up being early evening, late afternoon kind of thing. So fit it in when I can.
When you can. I know you were pretty religious about that. Make sure you have that healthy lifestyle amidst all the craziness.
I read a book called Becoming Ageless, which I thought was very good. The thing that stuck out in the book, it was a lot of talking about, how do you just keep in shape and up to speed. But it was also about, I'd say, being flexible at your approach. And I actually met the author recently, and I said to him, the thing that surprised me was when you were talking about doing 2-a-days, because the last time I did 2-a-days was like middle school football. And his point was that even, I think, if people get in a routine where they work out in the morning like I do, then they're just like, I'm done, which is an acceptable answer. But he's like, then if you just do 20 minutes at the end of the day, that really compounds over time. And it's not about you're going to become a professional athlete. It's just about being active. I'm not sure I've committed to doing that, but it was an interesting takeaway that I got from that book.
It's smart. Look, sometimes I get in the mode of quantity over quality. I'll like go crazy, go on a run or something. You're right. And then you get hurt. And so I'm learning myself to tone it down a little bit and just show up. All right. So let's jump into some tougher questions. So it's been a couple of years since you visited the podcast. First question is where is IBM now? I mean, I don't really want to look back. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this question. Where is IBM now versus then? And how would you grade our performance?
If you put numbers on it, I think if you go back 4 years, IBM was 45%, 40% software and consulting. Now it's close to 75%. So the nature of what the company does is completely different than even just a few years ago. Why does that matter? It changes the balance sheet and it changes how you can invest. So I think probably the most undertold story to date is how much we've invested into R&D over the last couple of years, primarily in software, but it's also true in parts of hardware like storage. And this is really kind of following through on, on day one, Arvind said hybrid cloud and AI. You can't really do that if you're not investing aggressively in R&D, engineering capacity, building new products. And I think we've definitely done that. And I think we're just getting started. You mentioned the Think conference before. We've also kind of said we're going to bring new innovation forward twice a year. We'll do the Think conference, which is really the flagship event. And then we have an event called Tech Exchange that runs in the fall, which is really more of a developer conference. And so as I work with the product teams, we're kind of focused on how are we going to show up really well at both of those events. We got 2 windows a year to demonstrate where all the R&D investment is going. And I think it's a great way to rally the teams. Everybody always gets stuff done a little faster when you have a
Of
deadline.
course.
And I think it's a great way for people to demonstrate that this is today's IBM.
Hybrid cloud and AI, right now it sounds like no brainer. But at the time when we announced hybrid cloud, I think there were some naysayers that would say, that's because maybe IBM is struggling in cloud. But now it looks like, hey, we had the right strategy all along. Can you say a few words about that?
I think both can be true. Let's be honest. IBM was struggling in public cloud. You have to admire what AWS and Microsoft have been able to pull off. But it was pretty clear talking to clients that moving everything to a single public cloud was not going to be the answer. And in comes hybrid. And there was a report from Barclays last week that said their data, 83% of companies are now repatriating something to run on private cloud. And so that the world is going to be multi-public cloud and private cloud, there needs to be a technology answer to that. And I think that answer is IBM. So I think we've actually found a really good position in the market. And at the same time, we've built huge relationships with Microsoft and AWS. That's driving a lot of workload for both of those clouds. And I think that is the essence of ecosystem and partnerships is can you do things that are good for both sides? And I think we found that right balance.
Do you think the data center is coming back in some way? The reason I ask that is because in the move to cloud, a lot of people are checking the boxes. These companies are trying to get to cloud, but then they see the cost. Then they say, well, now I need to go to multi-cloud. I see some of them actually saying, look, the data center is working today. Why am I moving so quickly? Do you think that's just a blip?
I read that projections was $400 billion will be spent on data center refresh in the next 5 years. That feels about right to me. So does that mean it's coming back, or does that mean it's getting modernized? Probably more of the latter. I think there's always been a place for the data center, but they'd probably gotten a little bit long in the tooth in many cases, which is why when clients were saying, well, do I want to modernize this or do I just want to move everything to cloud? The move everything to cloud became an easy answer at the moment, but easy is often not sufficient, which is why I think it comes back to we're at the start of a pretty significant modernization of data centers for AI type workloads, for containers, for multi-cloud type workloads. I'm pretty sure that's going to happen.
Back to our question of then versus now, is there anything, if you could go back 2 to 3 years, you would tell yourself and say, hey, look out for this? Any mistakes that you would openly say, hey, we should have got this better? Any blind spots?
The only debate is which mistakes were the biggest, because there's always mistakes. We invested heavily in building out foundation models. It was really second half of 2019, early part of 2020. I think we probably could have gone even more aggressively at that point. We made an investment that was fairly unpopular at the time, which was significant capital investment. I remember that meeting well. And anything in hindsight, I wish I'd actually gone 2 or 3 times as aggressive as we did. Just because, we've gotten in this world now, I'll call them AI years, which seems to happen every week or every day. That's how fast things iterate. And so had we done 2 or 3x the capacity at that point, the cycle times would probably be even faster now. But we're still at the point now where we're iterating weekly. As I tell our sales teams, if you're using a model that we pushed into production 20 days ago, you're like hopelessly out of date at this stage. And so I think we've done a good job of coming up the curve on that speed. But if anything, at that time, by the way, 2020, whether or not generative AI would happen was a complete unknown. So it's actually very easy to say this in arrears that I wish we'd done more, because at the time putting 100 million or so into something that you're not sure is going to happen felt aggressive. But now that I play it forward and now that I know it's happened, yeah, of course I wish we'd done 2 or 3x that, but it was hard to predict at that
Look,
time.
hindsight's always 2020. You know what's frustrating for me is, and I tell this to clients all the time, we've been in the foundational model business for quite a while. And then the transformer came along. But I guess you got to give a little credit to ChatGPT in that, I do this podcast and I've been doing it for a long time now. We talk about it all the time. And even my friends after ChatGPT, they look at that and then they go, have you seen this? I say, yeah, we've been talking about this. But give them credit for getting it out there and getting the mind share around it. But since you went right into AI, let's talk about this. I agree. I think it's like mouse years at this point in time that we're talking about. I read the other day that Moore's laws happen every 6 months. I don't know what the math is on that, but okay. The point is that we're rapidly changing, and that's another understatement. Let me ask you this question. This is a fun question I banter around with my team, and I ask it because it really outlines the state of AI versus just asking, what do you think the future is going to bring with AI? And that is, would you short NVIDIA right now?
I'm certainly not going to give any projections on investment markets or stock.
You're not going to give stock advice?
I'm not. What I would say is, and I was an economics major in undergrad, and supply and demand is as true now as it was then. And so I would just look at what's happening in the market for GPUs. Are we supply constrained or do we have a supply glut? I think we're still supply constrained. Now, I would also say that every big demand moment tends to lead to a supply glut. So the only question is, when does that happen? And as Warren Buffett would say, trying to time markets is a fool's errand. So I don't think anybody can predict this. I would just say at the moment, I think there's more demand than supply. At some point, that will probably change.
But let me ask you this in another fashion, though. I got it. So the reason I joke around the NVIDIA, by the way, I did a presentation the other day, and NVIDIA was on stage, and I said, well, I can't ask this question right now. That's probably not good. But the point is, it's not against NVIDIA. They've been up like 2,000% over the last 5 years. It's just where the industry is going. And I got to believe, at least my take, and I'd like your feeling on this, is that models are going to get more purposeful, meaning they're going to get smaller. I think there's a lot of companies getting in the game to give competitive options to GPUs. If the models get smaller and you want to reduce inferencing costs, like if I want to put it on my laptop, I put Mistral on my laptop the other day, and now I can run it, and it's a CPU, and it answers like everything that I've seen out there. And going back to the hype cycle that you just essentially referenced that we've been going through, it's essentially got to correct itself, doesn't it?
Don't know. It's an unbelievable time for technology. I think we have to acknowledge that. If you think of ChatGPT as the Netscape moment for AI, let's follow through that analogy. Did Netscape set off an era around the internet that we later concluded, hey, the internet's going to slow down, the internet's not that interesting? I don't think that actually ever happened. Yes, there were ups and downs post Netscape, but it's generally been up and to the right. The question is, does AI follow a similar path? And I think I can argue both. I think we'll certainly see some downs, but I feel like this is the direction that the world heads, as opposed to this is a blip.
Fair enough. How would you articulate IBM's position on AI?
When your entire focus is on building AI for other businesses, meaning B2B, I think the challenge is completely different than if you're focused on B2C. And 90% plus of the people I see in the market right now are going after B2C. And I think it's because the Google search revenue and profit engine is too attractive for most people to ignore. So that puts us in kind of a different camp where we're not necessarily interested in how do you get more and more publicly available data? How do you get larger parameter models, more tokens? It actually puts us in a place where we need to be way more focused, because we want the data that's going to be interesting for B2B use cases. What will help customer service? What will help digital labor? What will help coding in specific languages, not every language? What will help governance of AI, what will help the next data architectures. It's just a different problem set than most people in the market are pursuing right now, which I think is great, which is why I think a lot of our discussions end up being, can we get you performance and accuracy with smaller models? Because smaller models have lower inference cost, and every business cares about cost ultimately to deliver on AI. So I think we're just playing in a different space than where most of the attention is in the market. And most people don't even make that distinction between B2C and B2B, but I think it's pretty fundamental.
When I do a pitch, I talk to three areas around the enterprise, and it really talks to the areas that maybe I'm most concerned about. I'm interested in your feedback here. That is, look, fake news within AI, I'll call it fake news, governance, being able to know where your data is coming from, make sure it's free of bias, et cetera. And then I think cost. To me, those are my top three that are impacting or are at the top of the priority list for enterprise AI. And we're addressing that through open systems, targeted, trusted governance, et cetera, that I could go into. Do you think those are the three? Is there anything that you would add? Or is there anything you think that I'm overstating with one of those three?
I think the real challenge for businesses is more about use cases and the competitive field where they play. And I was with a group of clients this week, and I made the comment that AI is probably not going to disrupt your business, but your competition using AI probably will. And I think every company has to think about that, which is, what do I need to be doing to stay ahead of the curve? Because on one hand, if everybody does the same use cases, then actually nothing changes. Just everybody probably becomes slightly more productive, slightly more agile, but nobody actually gets an advantage. The advantage is going to come with a proprietary data set that's tuned to solve a problem that your competition is not solving, that you can solve before they do. That's really the kind of discussion that I'm in the most, is trying to help CEOs think through that challenge.
Look, one more question on AI. We just released InstructLab. This is a project that came out of Red Hat and IBM Research. I think it could be a game changer. I wanted to get your thoughts on it. I don't know anybody that has this, which is essentially, here's the way I would just describe it, and I'd like you to describe it. It's like a command line interface tool. You can work with models to test skills, knowledge, and ultimately augment that large language model, putting new information into the taxonomy repository. I mean, that's a game changer, which will reduce the requirement on all the fine tuning that we're doing today. You tell me, I'm still studying it. You see it the same way?
Maybe a simple explanation. Today, it's hard to contribute skills or data to make a model better, because when you do that, it actually becomes a separate model. And so what you see is companies they want one model and they end up with thousands of models, because every time you contribute something, it forces you to start over. What InstructLab fundamentally enables is contribution. So if you think about what happened in the open source world, what the catalyst for open source was, anybody can contribute and make the product better. That is what we're bringing to AI with InstructLab, is anybody can contribute, it will get better, community can share in the contribution. What this really means is clients that are working with us that leverage our base Granite models can now contribute to make that model better. The things that are proprietary to them stays with them. So it gets back to this AI years thought, which is models will now approve in hours as opposed to weeks or months. So to your point, yes, I do think it's a significant game changer, but it's all about delivering better and faster and enabling contribution. That's what the world needs to know.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. I want to step back for a second. I know we're going to run out of time as always, because there's so many topics to discuss, but I want to make sure I get this out. You kind of talked to this to start the podcast, but if you were to summarize the state of IBM today now, the vision and the long-term outlook, what are your comments there?
We're becoming more of an engineering culture, deeper technical skills. The big part of, in addition to hiring and investing a lot in R&D, it's been about how do we change our go-to-market to be much more technical, much more experiential in terms of how we work with clients. And so if you think about the Lou Gerstner era, where at the time he said IBM is going to be a solutions company, which was about integrating, everything IBM could do. I would say this is a more technical version of that. The world needs a strong IBM that can solve deep technical problems and pull together technology from IBM, pull together technology from IBM partners, and help that make them successful. That's really what we're trying to do. And it's going to be much more focused. As you've seen, we've divested parts of the business that didn't really fit with the mission of hybrid cloud and AI. We love infrastructure. We're going to be infrastructure technology, and that manifests through hybrid cloud and AI. So the company will continue to be very focused in those areas.
Awesome. What must we get right?
I think for any business, number one is you have to be on the right side of the trend. I'm actually very confident we're on the right side of the trend. So because I think every company, as we've talked about, is headed in the direction that I just described. So that's what we have to always make sure of, because the world does change. I think from there, the world is always about talent and how do we build the skills within IBM with all the hiring we're doing? How do we make sure that that experience is great for onboarding people, training them, making them productive quickly? Like that's what I spend a lot of time thinking about. And then lastly is how do we make it a delight for clients to work with us? I think we're not perfect on that yet. And honestly, the bar for working with clients should be perfection. And I want to keep making progress.
Are there any emerging technologies that you think that we haven't even talked about as of yet? I mean, we're talking about hybrid cloud and AI that are going to have a profound impact that you'd ask the listeners to keep their eye on. I mean, I'm sure quantum's got to be in there someplace, but anything else you'd mention?
Quantum's probably the technology with the greatest asymmetric upside. And so I do think everybody should keep an eye on that. But it's hard to figure out when does that really come into maturity. That's probably the one that I'm the most excited about that's on the horizon. The interest adoption we've gotten with QuizKit, which is the open source developer kit for quantum, indicates that there's a lot of interest, but this is coming. I mean, maybe faster than people think.
I got to tell you, it worries me a little bit in terms of faster than people think because of the ability when we talk about, I mean, I'm not trying to scare folks here, but Shor's algorithm being able to crack cryptography. And I keep in the back of my head, I remember the University of Waterloo said, hey, there's a 1 in 7 chance that's going to happen in 2026, 1 in 2 chance that's going to happen by 2031. I mean, everything is built on cryptography. This could be a rude awakening that happens. Does that concern you, or you say, no, we got time?
I think we have time, but I do think people need to be prepared. With Y2K, the helpful thing about Y2K is there was an actual day. so you knew when it was coming. There is no actual day with quantum. So when I do talk to clients about things like quantum safe and do you understand the nature of your environment, I do think people need to be prepared, but there's no actual date. And so when there's no actual date, sometimes things get kicked down the road. I think people need to keep an eye on this.
All right. Look, any announcements that you can give us insight of? I mean, a little early announcements, a little excitement that folks should look forward to.
There'll be two main anchor points. One is we're going to be announcing a lot more that we're doing in open source and contributing to open source. I'll stay away from specifics for the moment, but I do think this will send quite a message around the world of what's possible with AI and open source. So that's number one. Number two is we've been quietly building out what I think is the most complete set of automation capabilities in the industry, from observability to networking to FinOps to resource management. And we'll kind of talk about where we've gotten to with automation and the vision for where we're going. I think those will be the two main areas to highlight.
All right. Hey, if you got time for 2 more questions, I'll be very quick. These are the last 2, and then I'll let you go. I want to be respectful of your time. This is kind of a more difficult one. I probably asked you that in the past because you always do this extremely well. But what do you think is true and nobody agrees with you on?
I don't think there will ever be artificial general intelligence.
Well, that's pretty good. And why is that?
I think John McCarthy, computer scientist, said it really well. I think he said this like 40 years ago. He said, the minute it works, it's no longer called AI. And you can actually see that through the years. Once stuff starts working, we say that's not AI anymore. Like it's a forever moving goalpost. And I think the same will happen on this notion of AGI. I don't think we're going to ever have this moment where we say it's finally here. I think AI will continue to get incredibly better. It will absolutely wow us. But I'm not sure we'll ever arrive at the moment where we say it is now here. AGI has arrived. I'm a little skeptical of that.
That's a great answer. Look, one thing I know about you is you are a tremendous communicator in terms of your leadership and being able to align a company the size of IBM. The way you communicate vision, the way you talk to investors. Do you have a philosophy around that you can share with the listeners?
I think the most important thing in communication is simplicity. Can you say things in a way that anybody can understand? Then you can always go deeper. You can always go further. But I think the people that sometimes struggle more kind of dive into the detail and they don't kind of bring people along. So I think the classic test of can you explain something to your teenager in a way they understand it is something people should think about in almost every venue where they're going to be presenting or talking. Because if you can start with that simple and then go deeper, you just bring everybody along. And if you bring people along, they feel like they're connecting to the message.
Good advice. Rob, I appreciate you as always. I could go on forever. I mean, I've got like about 50 questions. Hopefully we can get you back on to ask those questions. You got any new hobbies or anything else you're doing outside of work, outside of IBM?
My big focus 6 or 7 years ago was learning to smoke brisket, which I think I've made pretty good progress on. I'm highly confident in my brisket skills. My new challenge is pizza, because making pizza crust is actually incredibly difficult to make good dough. And then there's just so many variables involved between water, flour, yeast, timing. Do you let it sit for 72 hours, 48, 24, temperature of the oven? There's like thousands of variables, and I don't have it right yet. So I want to figure that out.
That's an outdoor pizza oven you're using or what?
Yes.
And then the previous year, I know you were using a Yoder or something, that indirect heat. I mean, it wasn't like a pellet, was it?
Yeah, no pellets. I've got a Yoder offset smoker, so I'm loading logs on the side.
So you're doing it old school, the right way, huh?
Yes.
All right.
Definitely.
Thank you for being here, Rob. You're fantastic. I greatly appreciate it. Podcast listeners, hopefully you found it as enjoyable as I did. Reach out to us on almartintalksdata@gmail.com. We'd love to chat with you. See you. Bye-bye.